what we can do better, what we need to highlight. But more importantly, it's a scorecard and a report card for us to share with the public. And we're doing great work, and we need to share our progress and the great work we're doing, both with CPS and the community. And I think as we go forward, we always want to be able to say it's a great partnership that's getting these results. So Sharon, we're going to go ahead and let you introduce our first speaker.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Owens. We are so pleased to have the entire innovations team here who are partners in doing this work. I will turn it over to Dr. Kalana Hindert, who will be leading the presentation and starting. She will in turn also introduce her full team who will be sharing in the presentation. Just to remind everybody that the presentation will occur in 4 sections. After each section, we'll have a moderated Q&A session conducted by Kenitra Mathis, who is our CPP Program and Evaluation Manager. At any time during the presentation, please type your questions in the chat screen, and we will collectively respond to those and make sure that they are answered during the Q&A session. And a reminder that all of the evaluation reports will be ready tomorrow on the CPP website that you'll see listed here. And at the end of the presentation, we'll also share where the upcoming presentations will be to the public and to our key stakeholders. So thank you, Dr. Hindert, for leading this team and a great partnership again this year to share our impact, our effectiveness, and our outcomes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Owens and Shara. Just want to pull up my screen to make sure everyone can see it. So can everyone see that?
It's a little small. Can you make that bigger?
Yes. All right. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thanks to everyone who decided to join us. I will introduce members of our team that are present today. Of course, we have Dr. Monica Mitchell, who is the Senior Co-Director of Innovations. We are a program out of Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I am on the call myself. My name is Kalana Hindert. I'm a Senior Project Management Specialist with Innovations. We also have my colleague, Dr. Aubrey Culp, on the line as well. She is also a Senior Project Management Specialist. She will be presenting the qualitative results today. And then we also have Peter Petronio, who is a very valuable member of our team. He is our data guru. So very pleased to be here today with you. So I want to start off by taking a look at the table of contents from our main evaluation report. And here I've highlighted in blue those topics that are new to the evaluation this year. So to make sure I'm making good use of our time together, I'm going to spend most of the time focusing on those newer aspects of the evaluation as we go through. Okay, so the first, one moment, I'm trying to make sure I can see my full screen.
Kalana, you accidentally muted yourself.
I don't think we can start this conversation without talking about COVID-19 and the impact. Here we are summarizing some of the COVID-19 impacts on our local stakeholders. So we spoke with a group of parents of children who are preschool age, but who have not enrolled in their children in preschool. And 41% of that group expressed hesitancy about enrolling their child in preschool based on COVID-19. We also spoke with parents of children who are currently enrolled in CPP programs. They were expressing the same type of hesitancy. Between 36% and 60% of those parents were also concerned about returning to school under these conditions. And then when speaking with providers about the impact of COVID on their sites, some providers reported that their enrollment has decreased anywhere between 36 and 58%, which is obviously a big blow and very hard to cope with. Providers are also telling us that they're having trouble finding enough preschool teachers to hire. And over 30% of those providers also had difficulty getting some of their staff to return to work. We also wanted to understand the impact of COVID-19 nationwide. So the National Association for the Education of Young Children over this past summer surveyed about 7,500 childcare staff members across the country. They are finding very similar outcomes to what our local providers are experiencing. So nearly 80% of their providers said that they're experiencing staffing problems. 50% said that hiring was more difficult. And as a result of that difficulty, they are serving fewer children. About a quarter of those participants were forced to reduce their hours because of lack of enrollment. And then, we know that when this is affecting the larger economy, because if parents can't get childcare, they cannot return to work. So CPP, in the midst of all of this upheaval and stress that people are going through, has been a real strength and support to the community. One of the things that CPP did was create an extended learning session. And they offered this during the months of June through August of last year. They are also offering another session this year. And the idea behind that is to try to keep learning continuous, keep that preschool education going year round, to try to stem some of the learning loss that may occur from the COVID-19 disruption. And this next point, we heard a lot about with talking with providers. They're very grateful that CPP offered some sessions about how to apply for various COVID-related grants and aid. Many of them expressed that had they not gotten this aid, they couldn't have stayed open. CPP also quickly shifted to offer electronic and online learning tools for providers, parents, and preschoolers, also offering online professional development to keep that process moving along. So now I want to shift to taking a look at how preschoolers who participate in CPP-TA programs fared when it came to early literacy readiness. So this is an assessment that Cincinnati Public Schools administered to kindergartners. So in years past, they administered the kindergarten readiness assessment. This year, they administered the Acadience Reading Assessment. Formerly, it was known as Dibble's Next. So the focus of this assessment was on early literacy. It is not a kindergarten readiness assessment, so that's why we've kind of changed the title of this presentation to really be accurate to what is being measured. There is no correlation between Acadience reading and the kindergarten readiness assessment. So we won't be making comparisons between those cohorts or showing trend data. But one very great thing we can say is, much like previous years on the kindergarten readiness assessment, is that CPP students outperformed non-CPP students on this Acadience reading assessment. So I just want to take a look at the demographics for both of these groups that we're talking about. So for the group of students who had previous CPP preschool experience, their demographics don't look drastically different from those students who don't have any documented previous preschool, either with CPP or via CPS. The main differences are that there's a higher percentage of Black students in the CPP cohort, and there's a higher percentage of SES4, which are those higher income groups in the non-CPP cohort. Everything else is pretty much the same. So when taking a look at overall reading performance, the CPP-TA participants did perform slightly better overall compared to the non-CPP students. So 51.4% of the CPP students were at or above the benchmark compared to 50.1% of non-CPP students. So this is a look at the overall performance. We also examine this performance by race. And here we found even more impacts. So Black students, Hispanic students, and those identifying as multiracial or other benefited even more from having CPP experience when it came to performance on this test. So you can see they improved by 9.5, 8.2, and 15.1 percentage points over their non-CPP counterparts. We also looked at these outcomes by socioeconomic status, but before I get to those outcomes, I want to revisit how these students were grouped into these SES quartiles. So there are measures that come from the American Community Survey to rank neighborhoods, and they are ranked by a variety of neighborhood risk factors. Some of those factors include the median family outcome, poverty rate, SNAP eligibility. So what's important to remember about these categories is that the quartiles are based on the general socioeconomic makeup of that neighborhood. They are not characteristics that are attached to the individual children in that neighborhood. So now once we take a look at performance by SES, I think the most stark difference here we can find in SES 1. These are the kids who come from the lower income neighborhoods. They would be the children with the greatest need. And it's really shocking. So CPP students in SES 1 were at or above the benchmark 52.9% of the time, compared to their non-CPP, the cohort was only 29.5. That is a difference of 23.4 percentage points. So that's really a significant difference. And I think this is another data point. We've known for a long time that preschool especially benefits the kids that have the most need, and that's really demonstrated here. We also looked at reading performance by preschool attendance, and we also found a difference that those who attended preschool, 90% or more of their scheduled days were at or above that benchmark more frequently compared to those who did not attend on a regular basis. Another variable of interest was trying to understand if there are differences in performance based on the star rating of the preschool provider. So these are still all CPP TA providers ranked star rated either 3, 4, or 5. So based on the sample, these kids were pretty homogeneous. The vast majority of the preschoolers were at 5-star rated preschools. Our sample size for 3 and 4 was so small, even when we combined them, there were only 20. So there's not a lot that you can draw from this. Even if these two cohorts were more even in the sample size, you see there's not much of a difference. So we can continue to keep our eye on this, but if most of the students continue to attend 5-star rated programs, we're really not going to see much of a difference here. Now this is an analysis I thought was very interesting. We looked at the reading performance by pandemic site status. So there are 45 TA providers who were able to provide instruction without extended closures. They were able to get certified to become pandemic sites. They were able to stay open and operational much more continuously compared to other programs. So of those preschoolers who attended what we are calling the pandemic sites, 56.8% of them were at or above the reading benchmark, compared to only 42.9% of the preschoolers that were at the non-pandemic sites. So I think this is some evidence that supports continuous learning, year-round preschool instruction, the less interruption we can have in their learning, that really goes forward and makes a difference in their later academic outcomes. So that's the difference of 14.1 percentage points. So we are going to transition now to talking about the quality improvement program. But let me back up a moment. So as part of the new deliverables this year, CPP wondered, hey, we have a good idea of what tuition assistance does for children as far as supporting their readiness for kindergarten. They're also interested in finding out for those preschoolers that attend quality improvement sites, would they also show differences in performance? So in order to get this data, it's kind of a multi-step process. So with TA applications, we get consent forms from parents when they apply to get tuition assistance. There's not a similar process on the QI side. So this year, we spent time building up a warehouse of consent forms for QI preschoolers. To date, we've collected 61 consent forms across 19 unique providers. What that will allow us to do is next year, when we present this readiness data, we'll also be able to show the impact of quality improvement on performance in kindergarten. So that's something to look forward to, but we have already started that process. So another new feature this year is taking a look at preschooler progress. Like I mentioned, so we have a couple years of data looking at how those preschoolers perform once they get to kindergarten. We also want to understand what is actually happening within these high quality preschool programs. How are they making progress? Are they making progress during preschool? How do we measure that? So we took a look at 2 assessments, which were chosen due to their similarity to one another and also to their wide availability. So preschools that attend CPS, the CPP community schools, and many of the Head Start providers use these 2 assessments. They are also evidence-based. So the ELA looks at progress along 7 domains, some of those being social language development, literacy, mathematics, physical well-being. The TS Gold as well documents development across 6 domains. Some of those are social, emotional, physical, cognitive, and other. So what we were looking for is to understand if students made progress from their fall assessments with these 2 measures to spring assessment. So we actually have 2 academic years of data for these assessments. So for the 2019-20 year, we saw that preschoolers did make progress from fall to spring in these 4 domains, social, emotional, physical, language, and literacy, and math. And I just want to talk about that social emotional outcome briefly. These kids have been under a lot of pressure, parents, a lot of disturbances and disruptions because of COVID. This really was a domain of interest by many in the field, wondering if children are getting support, if they're learning how to be supported in their emotional wellness. And it turns out that social emotional development was the highest category that the preschoolers made progress in. So I thought that was positive. And we can also look at the scores for the 2020-21 year as well. Again, we saw that the preschoolers made progress along 4 domains, physical, language, literacy, social emotional again, and progress in math. So I think this is a good way to continue the progress of understanding the impact of specifically of CPP TA programs on development, but not only academic readiness. We know that the whole child needs to be considered when you think about readiness for kindergarten and even beyond. So I think it's great that we can take a look at some different domains and see that progress is being made there as well. Okay, I'm just going to hit some highlights on the tuition assistance program. here we can take a look at the provider network. And I think this is a really great result that you see the number of TA providers has increased every year of the program. So even during all the disturbances, the data that we've heard about COVID impacts, this is really just kudos to the CPP staff that has continued to engage in the community and with these providers to support them through this process and to bring them into the network. So at the end of this past academic year, the TA network had 114 providers. And enrollment, we've talked a little bit about enrollment so far and the impact of COVID. So in this past academic year, enrollment was down about 9.4% from the previous year. And then if we look at the change from 2018 to 2019-20, there was about 11.8% decrease there as well. So I don't think anyone is surprised by this. What I think is encouraging is as I look at some of the data, and I presented some of that, when providers are reporting the magnitude of some of their enrollment loss, it's up to 50% some places. And here, that's probably only a total of about 20% over the 2 years. So I think this is a positive spot. There's really not much you can do when a global pandemic comes along. But again, that's just evidence of CPP's engagement in the community and commitment to continue to grow in this program. By contrast, if you look at the difference from the first to the second year of the program, when this is a non-COVID, these are non-COVID years, right? That was a 52.9% increase. So I think that speaks to, what we might expect, what kind of increases we might think about as we move out of the pandemic and return to a little more normalcy. So applications have been down over the past year. Of course, there's a correlation between the applications and enrollments. The main point to make here is that compared to previous years, this year there was a higher percentage of denials due to the applicants being too young. So that makes us think, is there even more of a demand that we think those kids might have been 2 or not quite 3, but these parents are interested in getting them enrolled in preschool. So that's just something to think about because there's a shift in the parents who are applying for the programs. So now on to quality improvement, taking a look at this provider network. So as of June 30th, 2021, there were 119 quality improvement providers. So this number is just a bit lower than the previous year, 19-20, but it's still higher than 2018-19, which was a non-COVID year. So we have this provider network that is still continuing to grow higher than it was in a non-COVID year, still dealing with these challenges. So I think that's a positive takeaway there. In terms of, step up to quality movement, CPP staff in this year converted more providers than ever from quality improvement to high quality providers. So this year represented a 36% increase from the previous academic year. And so you can see the first year we tracked this, there were 8 conversions, then 22, and this year 30 conversions. So even in the midst of these interruptions to the step up to quality process, this team has continued to support providers via coaching and other resources so that quality improvement providers could become those high quality TA providers. So here is a brand new deliverable this year. I mentioned it briefly at the open. This is the extended learning session. So, CPP being very responsive to what's going on in the landscape, offered this session. It ran from June to August of last year. And it's really a way to continue the preschool learning year round. So there were a total of 360 children who enrolled into the ELS program during that initial cohort. And on average, the ELS students attended 84.4% of their scheduled days. So I think that's great. Parents were really invested. They were sending their children pretty consistently to this program. So what we wanted to do is understand for those children who attended ELS, which meant that they tended to go to preschool year round, what did their performance in kindergarten look like compared to the non-ELS participating children who tended to attend for about 9 months? So we're looking at difference between that continuous year-round participation versus those kids who had a little bit of a break and then came back to preschool. So overall, we do see an impact here. So those children who participated in ELS, thus continuing their year-round preschool education, were at or above that literacy benchmark 56.5% of the time, versus those non-ELS preschoolers who had a bit of a break, were only there 50.6% of the time. We also looked at these outcomes by SES. And here you can see again in the lower SES 1 and 2, which have the kids with the most need, that this continuous year-round preschool learning really made a difference. So we can see a difference of 8.5 and 8.3 percentage points for those students who were able to continue year-round. We even saw a difference within the highest SES category of 7.1 percentage points. We also took a look at ELS participation by benchmark and race. And here we see that Black students who participated year-round had an advantage of 8.2 percentage points when it came to kindergarten performance. We had too small of a sample for the white preschoolers, so we really couldn't make a comparison, but the same trend held forth with Hispanic and multiracial preschoolers as well. So our next topic, which is another new attribute, is CPP Plus, which is virtual and interactive learning. This is another great opportunity that CPP extended to its providers, its families, and its teachers to try to deal with some of the disruption due to COVID. There were 3 programs that they piloted a little bit late in the academic year. Ready Rosie, which is an app that uses video modeling to help promote school readiness. ABC Mouse, again, this is a subscription-based digital education service. CPP took care of these subscriptions for the families. And then Books Alive is a monthly subscription service. The kids receive a book, some crafts, some sight words to help build their literacy. So there are 71 preschoolers that benefited from these programs across 12 unique providers. So 71 tablets were delivered to preschoolers and their family, which is great. You know, we're always thinking about how do families with need access these items. And when you provide the tablets to them, that just cuts out some of the difficulty. The next topic is another new feature this year, the CPP Evaluation Advisory Panel, which I just have to say was a great experience and really gave a lot to the evaluation this year. So what this was a group comprised of 2 providers, 2 teachers, 2 parents, 2 community consultants. And these are consultants that have a minority-owned business or small business, and then as well as CPP's data and evaluation manager. And then Dr. Culp and I also attended these meetings to facilitate these sessions. So we held these sessions for about an hour or 2 every month between the months of January and July this year. So during these sessions, we talked about a variety of topics. We talked about items for surveys, what we should talk to parents, providers, and teachers about in focus groups, what challenges they were facing, because these are actual CPP stakeholders in real time informing what is going on with the evaluation, what we should be thinking about. So just a couple of items that were introduced to us as issues: the voucher process, voucher coverage, classroom sizes were challenging, thinking about children's disability in the context of enrollment and offering services, scheduling, transportation was a big one that came up. We also talked about parents' perception of the value of early education. So like I said, they were involved pretty intensely with some of the formation, especially of the qualitative items where we engage with community stakeholders. So this last slide, I really loved, we got so many stories from parents, providers, teachers as we engage with them in focus groups. But here are three, I think, that really just capture what these stakeholders are living through and how CPP has really made an impact on them. The first parent just talks about how childcare is her highest bill. She's not eligible for vouchers. So without tuition assistance, there's no way she could have afforded childcare for her family. She said it's about $185 a week without TA. The second parent really is talking about some of those things that parents value most when selecting a preschool. Her child's preschool is a safe place. They not only learn facts, so not just focused on those academic aspects, but her teachers focus on the social, emotional development of the child. She said they care about her child as a whole. We have heard that time and time again as being something that parents really value. And then finally, hearing from the CPP teacher, she's just talking about the fact that they're currently constantly learning and developing professionally, and that the parents actually notice that parents are consistently learning and engaging in professional development, and it makes a difference to parents as well. So we have some recommendations for next steps and opportunities. I'm not going to read every one of these. Some of these recommendations will be talked about in other parts of this presentation, but I do want to highlight just a few connected to what I talked about. So one of the recommendations is to extend learning to prevent learning, extend it to, basically we want you to continue the extended learning program. We've also already seen the impacts of that continuous year-round learning and how that translates to performance in kindergarten. So that's a recommendation to try to keep offering that if possible. And one thing we noticed when we were observing where preschoolers lived compared to where they lived in kindergarten, we did see that there was a bit of mobility across the city boundaries. So, one year, a family might live within the boundaries, they're attending a CPP TA preschool, and they might move less than a mile away, but then that next year, they're just outside the boundaries and may not qualify. But that same child might end up attending Cincinnati public schools, maybe even the very next year. We just thought there was an opportunity to consider expanding tuition assistance beyond the city boundaries to capture some of those families who might move in and out of the district, but ultimately land in Cincinnati public schools. And therefore they would benefit from the tuition assistance that helps them perform better later on academically. So I will pause there and we'll open things up for questions.
Okay, so we do have a few questions. At this time, the first question came in from Ms. Marcia Butel. So I'll ask Ms. Marcia, are you unmuted and would you like to ask your question?
Yes, my question was about the preschool progress and it specifically on one of the slides on math. And I think Peter gave me an explanation as to why that might have been.
Is it this slide here?
Because progress,
You're
I don't
cutting
see
in.
it change yet.
I'm sorry, you were cutting in
I
and
don't know
out.
where it was in the book. I don't know what slide number. I know my internet's a little janky today. Yes, yes. That number versus the number on the next slide in math, it was just so dramatic of a change.
Right.
And it could have been the sample size in the year, so.
I think
Yeah.
you're right on
I'm
with
good.
that. I think, and yeah, and I think you called it there. So we had limited data for the 1920 cohort because that's when they were really impacted more by that COVID interruption. And we had a larger sample size in 2021. So I think you're right on with your assessment of what likely happened.
The only thing I would add also is sometimes we're not the only ones using this data. The schools are also using this data. So it's possible that they may have seen the lower scores and they may have decided to target the math. So it could have come up for that reason also.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I believe the next question has been addressed by Dr. Monica Mitchell. The question that came in from Deborah Offsap, but I'll also open it up to Ms. Deborah if you had an additional question that you would like to ask at this time.
Yeah, I'm trying to calibrate the seasons of COVID based on this evaluation. So this evaluation covers the 2020-21 school year. And there were different variables that year in terms of open, close. And did those continue from your standpoint in the community providers network? And if they did, how did that impact the data that you got and how it was evaluated?
So I'll just answer briefly. I think Kalana is probably the best expert on this. So your question was, what was the contract period? The contract period was to evaluate the outcomes over the 2020-2021 academic year, but because of the various things that we were evaluating, some of which were preschool outcomes where we did some, we looked at some archival data and some other variables that we looked at, we may have gone back to the previous year. And also in some of the qualitative data that we may have asked stakeholders about how this might have been impacting their business, they may have also referenced, you know, they may have not only looked at the previous year, they may have been thinking about, you know, a broader range of time. But I'll let Kalana also add on to that answer.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Monica. And wherever we notice that there are data gaps or smaller sample sizes due to COVID, we try to note that. I think in the section that we've covered so far, the biggest difference is, you know, we didn't look at KRA data this year. There was a different assessment used. Typically, we try to present some trend data. This might have been the third year we could look at KRA outcomes, but we're not able to do that this year. So, you know, going forward in this presentation, I think we try to make note of any time there are impacts on data or the way we approach the analysis based on COVID.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any additional questions and or comments at this time?
I do have one additional, and it's around social emotional and the impact at the earliest stages of children who've been traumatized by COVID. Some of that is being seen in schools, K and up, a lot of it's being seen in schools K and up. And I'd like to know, from the perspective of this evaluation, social and emotional was in there, but I think it's very important as we go between year 4 and 5 to track that, because some of these children will be, kindergarten in the next year or second year of preschool. So that's a comment and a question around, what type of deep dive occurred looking at the social emotional impact, which I would suggest would be as heavy or more heavy than the academic.
I would agree. Can I speak on this first, Kalana, and then I'm happy for you to add to it. So one of the tremendous wins for this year, I think we had a lot of wins, and I'm happy that we were able to really add on to the evaluation in the way that we did. But to me, the biggest win of all was our ability to start to build the preschool data warehouse. Because to do that, we had to start building relationships with preschool centers. And we did take the low-hanging fruit first. So we did go to some of the larger centers, CAA, CPS. But what's great about it is now we can actually go to some of the other centers who are collecting this data. And I believe that we will see the numbers even for 2019-20 grow as we say, hey, can you help share the data from 3 years ago, or whatever you have. And I think we will learn a lot about the social impact. So even if you look at the small numbers, you can see that with the small numbers, like, wow, it was 88% in 2019. And in 2020, that number dives. A lot of the impacts are diving. And I think we will learn a lot about the trends, as you mentioned, Debbie, of how COVID and how life itself is impacting young kids.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you draw any conclusion about attendance? How many days can you miss and still show improvement? Is there any correlation? Do any work with attendance?
Yes.
Is there a certain number of days we got to really strive to make sure we have these kids in place and seats to get the best results?
So I think we talked about attendance a couple different ways. So on this slide here, we looked at how attendance in preschool, and these are the high quality providers, impacted reading performance in kindergarten. So those with regular attendance, which we consider 90% or higher, we clearly saw that they were at or above that reading benchmark more often than those who did not attend on a regular basis. And then when we talk about the extended learning session, that I think that's two parts of talking about attendance. One is that we saw that these kids attended 84.4% of their scheduled days, even within the ELS. And I'm thinking that that's got to make an impact as well when we see the differences in their reading performance compared to the non-ELS cohort. So I think this session speaks to how important year-round continuous education is. So that's kind of one way to look at attendance. And then even within their scheduled days, what percent of their scheduled days are they attending? And every time we see differences in attendance rates, we see impacts on performance in kindergarten.
I just want to add one thing. Can you go back, Kalana, to the slide on daily attendance? So 90% might sound really good for preschool, but if we were to talk about this in the context of school-age children, there's about 174 days in a school year. This would mean that a kid is missing 17 days of school, and 90% attendance is actually the definition of chronic absenteeism. So this is not a good definition. I mean, this is not an ideal definition, let me say that. So if we were to cut this data in terms of 95% or 98%, I guarantee you we would see much better outcomes.
Okay, so that's important, because to me, that means that we got to figure out how we can work on attendance in order to improve outcome.
Exactly,
Okay.
and it sets the standard. If we're already saying you can miss 10% of days in preschool, and then you carry that over to, to when the kid starts kindergarten and the kid starts first grade, and trust me, it sets the culture for a parent,
Right, exactly.
then we're already setting a bad precedent.
Correct. Thank you.
This is Marcia. I have my camera off because my internet's a little unstable today. But I had a question on the last slide where you had your recommendations, and one of them was to expand beyond the city boundaries. I just need to understand again what that meant. Are you talking about children that may live outside of the CPS and the provider that is within the boundaries? Is that the suggestion?
Yeah, I think you've got it. Sometimes we see that when families move even just slightly beyond the boundaries, they may miss out on the opportunity to benefit from high quality preschool. But then they may end up coming back into the district later on in their academic career, attending a CPS school, where if we think about trying to engage them, even though they may be a half a mile over the boundary, that student could have benefited from that high quality preschool and continue that benefit as they enroll in CPS. So, just something to think about with the mobility of our families. Some of these families aren't moving to completely, very far away, different school districts. There's just a little bit of mobility around the boundaries. Is there any consideration that we might want to provide that high quality preschool experience to that child anyway, thinking that that's an investment that will pay off later on as they continue within the district?
Yeah, and this is where mapping can be really helpful. So I would say, if we can look at high potential enrollment areas. So we know that there's an apartment complex, right across. If we know that in an apartment complex that 60% of the kids are using that address or using grandma's address to get into a school, and we see a pattern of that, then should we be investing in those kids anyway? Or if they're using, or a mom is using an employment address, they're enrolling in a preschool, even though they live in another place. I mean, this is where we saw this. We actually used this technique with Imagination Library and use mapping in this way to figure out how we should be investing in kids who are enrolling in Cincinnati public schools to begin investing beyond the traditional boundaries, as an example.
Okay. Thank you.
And we have our final question for this section from Ms. Christine Fisher. Ms. Christine, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
I'm just wondering about the difference in the impact of the extended learning session versus attendance. In my head, it would sort of be about number of days of quality preschool. And it looked like the impact of the extended learning session was less of a driver than 90% attendance. So is there a different way I should be thinking about that?
That's a really good question. So I'm going to look at that now. So the difference in terms of literacy for ELS, that's about 6 percentage points. So we can go back and look at attendance. And of course, we have to think about the differences in the cohort sizes because these are different types of cohorts as well. So let's see, that's about 11.1 different, 11.1%. So if these were the same exact kids and we were just looking at ELS and then we were looking at 90% attendance, I think we could make that conclusion. But because these are two different cohorts, I don't think we can do that apples to apples comparison. But that is interesting. I was thinking about that as we were talking about attendance, and this is something we'll think about this year, how to extract the effect of kind of that year-round continuous learning versus attendance according to their scheduled days? So that's a great question, and I think something we're going to continue to look into for this year.
Only thing I would add to that is we couldn't do a secondary analysis on extended learning. Like if we could have said, well, in extended learning, can we look at dosage of that? Could we look at the kids who attended 90% of the time in extended learning? We might have seen the same impact, but we didn't have the level of detail. We didn't have number of days attended in extended learning in the same way that we had with the other data. So I think part of it is being able to collect better data in extended learning as well.
I think attendance is obviously very important, and there's other research that supports that, especially at the K-12 level. But I think that it's also a little bit of selection bias of the people who are ensuring that their kids are there over 90% of the time. There's likely other factors that are also contributing to their higher scores.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And I will add, this year, CPP is doing another session of ELS. So we might be able to look at some different outcomes. So say if there might be a dosage effect for number of continuous ELS, learning. So that's even another type of attendance proxy we'll be able to talk about in this upcoming year. Kenitra, was that our final question for this section?
Yes, that concludes questions for the first section.
Okay, thank everyone so much. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Dr. Aubrey Culp. She is going to give some highlights of the Year 4 qualitative report.
Thank you, Dr. Hinder. I'm going to share my screen here with you all. All right, so I'm going to dive right in for the sake of time. So this year's Year 4 qualitative evaluation, we continued to engage parents, teachers, and providers to gain their perspectives on early learning and preschool. On the right, you'll see our table of contents from the report. And for our tuition assistance and quality and improvement stakeholders, we continued to focus on the key evaluation areas that we did in the previous year. But what's really new for this year's evaluation is the invitation that we put out to prospective stakeholders. So those include prospective parents who have preschool age children who are not enrolled in preschool or not connected to Cincinnati Preschool Promise, as well as prospective providers within the Cincinnati Public School District footprint who are not connected with Cincinnati Preschool Promise. We also talked about the impact of COVID-19, which Dr. Hinder talked some about in her presentation, and I'll hit briefly on that as well. And we included some questions about teacher recruitment, retention, and pay that will be covered in a next report presentation. So our evaluation approach was a mixed methods approach. We conducted focus groups and also had surveys. So our focus groups took place virtually through Microsoft Teams, and we had a total of 76 preschool parents, teachers, and providers from those 3 different stakeholder groups that participated. And we also sought to collect some quantitative data in those key focus evaluation areas through surveys. So our focus group participants completed surveys. And then we also broadened our reach with the surveys to all connected tuition assistance and quality improvement providers, as well as we shared the survey with local early education agencies to collect surveys from prospective parents and providers, and gained a total of 260 surveys. We recruited our participants through a variety of flyers and emails and phone calls. And the data that you'll see here in the following slides represents 75 unique preschool programs. So the main focus of today's presentation will be on the new group of prospective stakeholders. So we were able to engage 14 parents and 9 providers in our focus groups. and a total of 110 parents and 14 providers completed the survey. The demographics for our parents were that 46.8% were Black and 44% were white. 53.6% reported a household income below $50,000. Our prospective providers, 64.3% were Black, 28.6% were white. And then the majority of them had been a preschool teacher for 10 or more years. And I just want to point out before we dive deeper into the data that I realize that some of our sample sizes are somewhat small, so that interpretation and generalizability can be limited. We also asked our prospective providers about the demographics of the preschool and the students that they serve. So 71.4% of providers served the majority of children were Black, while 28.6% reported that the majority of the children they served were white. Their preschool types, 71.4% were type A or type B providers, which are also family child care providers, while 28.6% were single or multi-site centers. Regarding their step up to quality star rating, 4 were unrated and 7 had 1 star. And then the other 3 were quality providers. We also asked them about their seat vacancy, as we're seeking to gain more seats for our 3 and 4-year-old children, and 30.8% or 4 providers had 5 or more seats, and 5 providers had 1 to 2 seats available. So our first key evaluation area was to understand the awareness of Preschool Promise amongst the prospective parents and providers. So before completing our survey and learning about Preschool Promise, 47.3% of parents had heard about it before engaging with us. For providers, the majority had heard about Preschool Promise before completing the survey. And the ways that parents reported first learning about Preschool Promise was through friends and family and word of mouth, as well as some preschool providers or other providers. Other responses included news or their daycare providers. The next evaluation area was to understand prospective parents and providers' understanding of the benefits and services available to them through CPP. So given that less than 50% of parents had heard about Preschool Promise before completing the survey, and the underutilization of some of the programs and services by providers, it suggests that there's a limited understanding or some knowledge gaps in the stakeholder group. And there are a few quotes here that kind of highlight that just misunderstanding or lack of knowledge about step up to quality among parents, as well as just not knowing about Preschool Promise, and then uncertainty about what type of criteria or standards that they need, providers need to complete to benefit from Preschool Promise. So, what do we do to address the things that we've learned about stakeholders' awareness and low understanding of Preschool Promise? So we asked parents, what should Preschool Promise do to inform them about CPP and encourage them to consider a CPP provider for their child? And the top 3 answers were around just really getting information and meeting with teachers and visiting the preschool sites during school hours to see what different programs have to offer. And our focus group feedback here on the right aligns with those responses that we receive. They want to hear from current families, they want to see data, and they need a variety of options to get information, so that the delivery method and the time in which they're able to participate varies for parents. For providers, providers said that Preschool Promise could promote and connect their supports and services that they offer by holding virtual information sessions, virtual trainings, information about grant opportunities, and offering coaching and mentoring. So You can see on the right here some additional comments about sharing information when providers go to register their preschool at Hamilton County, and improving communication, sending more emails to prospective providers would help get information out to them to increase their awareness. And so before we really dive into the barriers in this next section, it's helpful to look at parents' current experiences and preferences, because they can inform the decisions that they're making to enroll or engage with Preschool Promise. So we see here on the left, the preferred place for early learning for our prospective parents are mostly in public schools, with 63.3% reporting a preference of a public preschool. But we do see that others prefer, a private preschool or a church preschool, or keeping their child at home. And then it's also interesting to see here on the right that the current learning environments for our prospective parents were that 25% aren't in any program at all, and almost 27% are attending a daycare, which is not the same as attending preschool, as we know. 9.9% are staying at home, or 4% are with a relative. So we asked parents what their concerns are with enrolling their child in preschool. And these results are similar to what we've seen across our TA and QI stakeholders, and that safety is a concern. New for our prospective parents is teacher and child ratio, with 38.2% saying that they would like a smaller teacher-child ratio, and then 38.2% also being concerned about how behavior or misbehavior in the preschool setting is dealt with. This next slide then points out those barriers. We asked both prospective parents and providers what they thought were the barriers to enrollment. So for our parents, they said that the financial cost of tuition is a barrier, and that also aligned with what prospective providers feel are barriers to preschool enrollment. It's also interesting to see that 64.3% of providers felt that work and caregiver schedules are barriers to enrollment. And we did hear throughout our focus groups feedback that working parents really need more flexible hours or a full day program, because they're not able to leave work, and some need before and after care in order to be able to send their child to preschool. This next slide shows what tuition assistance would help resolve for our prospective parents. And of course, financial and cost of tuition is the highest, with 62.7% of parents selecting that. But 35.5% also said that tuition assistance would help them get their child to their desired preschool. Next, we want to look at the barriers and challenges that our prospective providers are experiencing as preschool providers, because these likely impact how they're able to engage with CPP or their willingness to. So our top response was enrollment targets at 57.1%. And those are providers saying that they're having trouble filling the open seats that they currently have in their programs. Other things that they're having challenges with are with staff training and education, and staffing capacity, meeting their step up to quality criteria. So all of these things may contribute to their ability to engage with Cincinnati Preschool Promise. We then asked providers, what is the top thing that is impacting your participation or stopping you from applying to be a Cincinnati Preschool Promise provider? Knowledge and awareness came up a lot, but we also heard that there are concerns around getting ongoing coaching and resources for step up to quality as they gain more stars, and also concerns with the amount of paperwork and being busy and not being able to balance additional responsibilities. And then their location within the community being right outside of the boundaries of Cincinnati Public Schools footprint, although those providers reported that they're serving preschoolers who end up attending a CPS kindergarten. So what supports would be most helpful in helping prospective providers meet their needs? And again, teacher and educational resources and professional development opportunities were the top two areas at 71.4%. And then learning materials was the third area in which providers could use a lot of support. And then I quickly want to cover just a high level overview of the tuition assistance and quality improvement stakeholders. A lot of the results continued to be consistent with our previous evaluation, but we also uncovered some new findings. So in our tuition assistance stakeholder groups, we also had focus groups with 12 parents, 10 teachers, and 9 providers, and received surveys from 48 parents, 41 teachers, and 18 providers. Similarly, with our qualitative improvement stakeholders, we conducted focus groups and had smaller numbers who participated. And then in the surveys, we had 7 parents, 6 teachers, and 11 providers. Tuition assistance stakeholders demographics, over half were Black and 37.7 were white, and like 3/4 of teachers had obtained an associate's degree or higher. Within the quality and improvement stakeholders, 87% were Black, 8.7 were white, and about 3/4 of teachers and providers had completed some college or had obtained an associate's or bachelor's degree. So when we asked our tuition assistance families about how tuition assistance is impacting them, they shared that it's allowing them to access and afford preschool. So similar to last year, these numbers align. 47.8% of parents couldn't afford the cost of preschool, and 26.1% could only have afforded some of the cost without receiving tuition assistance. And then financial and cost of tuition continued to be a top barrier to preschool enrollment for parents and providers. Parents also still highly value quality preschool. Almost all of our TA and QI respondents said that an quality early educational experience was important or very important for their child. And aspects of quality that were very important to parents were that their child is learning social skills and is being prepared for kindergarten. And then some overall additional key findings. We learned, as I mentioned, that expanded care hours are important for parents. Tuition assistance is helping providers improve their programming and the resources that they can offer to the children enrolled in their preschools. And then similar to last year, quality improvement teachers and providers are still very satisfied with the coaching that they receive. And Preschool Promise supports are continuing to help teachers and providers with their needs around professional development. And they are very satisfied with those supports. Dr. Hendert talked about the impact of COVID-19 on preschool attendance and enrollment. So I won't repeat all of these numbers, but did just want to point out for our prospective parents that 40.9% of them felt that they were concerned about enrolling their child, and 20.5% said that COVID prevented them from selecting a preschool for their child to attend this fall. These quotes here also highlight that parents were concerned about the size of their preschool, moving their child to a smaller private program, or keeping them at home. I'll also highlight the quotes here, since we've covered the data, that reasons that providers, tuition assistance providers, felt that their enrollment numbers were lower were because they have their new enrollments continue to be very low. The follow through with enrollment is also low, and parents are continuing to work from home, and there's health and safety concerns. The impact of the impact of COVID on our quality improvement stakeholders. That 3 of our quality improvement parent survey respondents said that they too were hesitant to send their child to school because of COVID. And then the QI providers also reported some lower numbers because of parents not working and parents struggling financially during COVID because they're unemployed or underemployed and can't afford to pay for preschool. I'll summarize this slide for because of our time, and that most teachers weren't hesitant to come back to work, but providers reported that they're having difficulty hiring teachers back to their preschools during the pandemic, and still since. Reasons because no one is applying, were the main things that we heard. And then parents and teachers and providers gave a lot of compliments about the expanded supports that they received over the summer and last year related to COVID, as well as ways that Preschool Promise could expand supports during crisis period like COVID-19 pandemic in the future. So other than these great, you did a wonderful job and the support I received met my needs, other ways that a parent said that they could have been supported was through gift cards or bus fare support, expanding education about the crisis, and then ways that teachers and families can connect and support one another. So our recommendations and next steps are to continue growing the network of high quality providers and supporting providers with their step up to quality requirements, providing supports and tools for at-home learning for the children who are missing school, enhancing communications about CPP benefits within the TA and QI stakeholders, but also within the community to encourage new providers and families to enroll, creating opportunities for teacher and provider recognition, especially for our family child care providers, and then considering supporting providers with teacher recruitment as they seek to replace staff that they've lost and hire new staff because of the pandemic shortages.
Thank you so much, Aubrey, for that. I'm going to preempt this session just for a moment because I see there are multiple comments regarding terminology. So I will allow some of the members, I think Sally was the first member who expressed concern. Sally, will you tell us your concern about the use of the word daycare and how we might clear this up?
Yeah, so it is part about the use of daycare, but Dr. Culp said something like, of course, it was on the slide that showed that many of the children were in childcare now, and made a comment that, of course, daycare is not preschool, but oh my gosh, after all these years of the Preschool Promise and so much else, that's hard to hear because high quality daycare, childcare is equal in results and quality and child outcomes to whatever you might be thinking of when you say preschool. So those families who are using star rated, 5-star rated daycare right now, which we call childcare, they're getting the same or better that children are getting in public schools or private part day programs. So that, I just want to say that was hard to hear after all the work we've been trying to do to educate about what high quality community-based preschool looks like in a childcare setting.
Gotcha.
I think one thing that so when we write daycare in a report, we always get the feedback to take daycare out and put preschool. So I think from an evaluation perspective, we always get that feedback that to not use the word daycare as evaluators.
Right.
I think
Right.
that's
And
where
even
we,
when you use
yeah.
the word childcare,
Yeah.
we are talking about high quality settings in which very good preschool is being delivered. So childcare also is not a dirty word when we're talking
I
about high
understand.
quality preschool.
I think we're technical writers. We may not always say things the right way, but I think being on the reporting side where we're always getting our words struck out, daycare being one of them. And I think we're getting the messages, don't use the word daycare because daycare is
Right.
not the same as quality preschool. So I think, thanks for reminding us of that. And I think part of it is just honestly, community and cultural sensitivity that parents who use the word daycare or childcare, for them, those words are very meaningful. Those words are meaningful, even though us as advocates might be using different words, us as evaluators are using different words. We have to also understand the words that the community is using, that parents are using, and they, like you said, those are words that they find meaningful when they drop their kids off every day, even if it's grandma's house or whatever house. Those are trusted places that whatever it is. So yeah,
I want to say that the daycare doesn't bother me so much as the comment that daycare isn't of course, daycare isn't preschool. That was the one, not whether it's daycare or childcare, but daycare and childcare is high quality preschool in the Cincinnati Preschool Promise world.
yeah, thanks for that reminder.
Appreciate that so much. In the interest of time, I apologize, but
I have one
we're
question.
gonna-
I have one question though.
Go ahead.
Okay, on the slide on barriers, I was a little confused. It talked about the 25% of the families were not in the program. And then there's another line that said 9% stayed at home. What's the difference between not being in the program and staying at home? What else are they doing for not in some type of program?
9% were at home.
No, I thought it said 25% stayed that were not, the child was not enrolled in any program. And then 2 lines down, I think there was a line that said 9% were staying at home. I'm trying to figure out what's the difference between the two. Because if you would say to me, my child's not involved in any program, I'm like, okay, you're keeping them at home then. But you broke it down to 2 different things. I'm trying to figure out what is the difference.
Yeah, I think they could still be going somewhere. They could be going to kinship care. They could be in informal settings and still not be staying at home.
I was gonna say it might be they're staying with a relative. Maybe we made a distinction between that and staying at home.
But some of these kids, a couch surface, so even in regular schools, I'm still not sure what that means though, as a category. But okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
They could be in a unregulated family childcare home or with a relative. I think that's very common.
Absolutely.
I think
But
that's
if you go,
exactly what Shar said,
but it
too.
seems to me if you go into some place on a regular basis, that's a program.
Yeah, on
If
a regular
it's-
basis, that's true.
If
Yeah.
it's grandma's house, would we still consider that a program?
I learned a lot from my grandma.
Yeah,
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 it could be.
could be. Okay.
Yeah.
If you all don't mind, we have 2 more segments to get through, which have new to the evaluation information I think you're going to want to hear. So I'm going to try to move this along. So one of the new deliverables we had this year was this preschool teacher and provider wage analysis report. CPP was interested in what were some of the factors that impacted retention, recruitment, how that affected wage and benefits within the CPP network, locally in the state, and then also nationwide. So as a bit of background, we know from the research that the single most critical factor in retaining, hiring and retaining quality preschool instructors are pay and benefits, bar none. Preschool instructors in the United States are paid about half of what kindergarten teachers are paid. And then those assistant preschool teachers are paid even less than that. We also know from the literature that low compensation results in high turnover, which also hampers efforts to recruit those quality providers and teachers. Throughout this presentation and in the report, you'll see several references to $15. So why 15? Because it's a nationwide minimum wage benchmark. This minimum wage is particularly significant for women and workers of color. Almost 25%, 1 in 4, of those who would benefit from a $15 minimum wage is a woman of color. This is especially relevant to early childhood education because 95% of providers and teachers are women, and 40% of providers and teachers are racial minorities. So like I mentioned, CPP wanted a deeper understanding of any factors that impact recruitment, retention, and pay. So in terms of methodology, we took a mixed method approach. We did focus groups, key informant interviews, and surveys to collect qualitative data from a variety of stakeholders. We also analyzed wage data collected from CPP providers, a total of 359 wage data points were collected across 92 CPP providers. So really great participation and a pretty substantial data set. Just gonna move forward. So we looked at hourly wage by many different factors. The first being education level. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by this. And this is averaged across staff. So it doesn't matter what your position is, but the more education you have, the higher your wage is. For example, staff with a master's degree on average make $8.37 more than those with a high school diploma or a GED. We also analyze hourly wage by program type. And we found that regardless of your position, staff at TA providers made more money than QI staff, so $14.16 versus $12.98. They were also at or above $15 an hour more frequently than QI staff, so 42% of the time versus about 19% of the time. Looking at hourly wage by position. So the differential between what lead teachers make and what assistant teachers make is about 31%. Around the same type of differential when you look at what administrators make. And just so you know, in this report, the word administrator, director, provider are all used interchangeably. It's about leadership of a preschool site. So those administrators make about 30% a higher wage than the lead teachers. Looking at hourly average wage by provider type. Here, all the provider types are multi-site center, excuse me, single site center, type A, type B, and parochial. We found that of the 5 types, parochial schools had the highest average wage at $17.11. Those type A providers with smaller capacity have the lowest average wage at $12.34. We also thought, having looked at what wages look like within the CPP network, how do those compare to national, state, and other local benchmark wage data? So when you look at 2 positions, the directors of preschool sites, also known as providers, administrators, as well as assistant teachers. When you compare CPP wages to other their counterparts within Cincinnati, Ohio, and nationally, their wages are slightly lower than some of those benchmarks. But very interesting thing is for CPP lead TA teachers, they fared pretty well. Their wages were actually higher than the state and local benchmark wages within that same position. If we look at QI lead teacher wages, those were lower than all the benchmarks as well. So, it's always important to consider wages within the context of the local cost of living. So according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, The average rent, local rent for this area would require a wage of $14.84. And to afford a 2-bedroom apartment would be $16.64. What that means is single full-time workers at wages below these thresholds are not able to afford housing. What that means in the context of CPP is that if you take an average TA lead teacher who earns a wage of $15.49, they would be able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. Whereas a full-time QI lead teacher with that lower wage, which is underneath that required wage, may have trouble affording housing. So that's where CPP wage initiatives come in to try to supplement some of those wages and assist with a very important factor when it comes to retention and recruitment. So one of those wage initiatives is teacher promise grants. Right now, teachers who qualify can get up to $4,000. These grants are paid directly to lead teachers at tuition assistance providers. So in this past academic year, the maximum amount of this grant was increased from $2,000 to $4,000. So more money going into teachers' hands. Also, 54 new lead teachers received a teacher promise grant across 36 unique sites. And then 33 teachers continue to receive grants from the previous academic year. Did TPG have an impact on retention? Yes, it did. When we spoke with lead teachers who had received TPG, nearly 31% of those respondents agreed or strongly agreed that receiving that teacher promise grant impacted their decision to stay with their employer. And then when we did a quantitative analysis on the data, observing those teachers who were able to complete 12 months of service during the academic year, we found that 79% of those teachers receiving grants were retained at their preschool sites. The other wage initiatives CPP offers are staff support funds, and these are aimed at quality improvement preschools. They can qualify for up to $3,000 per lead teacher at each site, not to exceed $18,000 per site. And in this past academic year, 33 providers were able to take advantage of these funds. And that was support for 50 lead teachers across those providers. When we spoke with providers that received these staff support funds, they mentioned that they spent these funds in a variety of ways, including repairing their facility, funding some professional development, increasing wages for staff, and also ensuring that staff with similar titles received equivalent pay. We also administered surveys to preschool teachers and providers, and the research behind retention and turnover let us know that there are 3 major factors that impact retention and turnover. They are pay and benefits. So does the employee believe they are receiving adequate pay and benefits? Work environment is the second. Do they believe they work in a great environment? Do they have satisfactory relationships with their coworkers? And job fit. Is there a good fit between their responsibilities, what they expected of the job, and the training that they're getting to do their job? As well, are there professional development opportunities for those employees? So the survey participants were asked to respond to statements by selecting one of 5 options expressing their agreement. 1 would be strongly disagree. If they were neutral on a statement, they would select 3, and 5 would be strongly disagree. So what we did is we averaged those scores across participants. So we'll take a look. We did divide the results into categories. We looked at teacher results separate from provider results. So when it came to pay and benefits, we found that QI teachers were more satisfied with their salaries However, TA teachers were more satisfied with their combined pay and benefits. When we asked teachers, if you're not satisfied with your current salary, what would be a target salary, a good salary that you'd be satisfied with? TA teachers said $19.55. QI teachers said $15 an hour. We also asked teachers what types of benefits they were receiving. The categories were medical, dental, retirement, paid time off, performance bonus, or other. Here across the board, TA teachers were more likely than QI teachers to receive all the benefit types. There was an especially large gap when it came to retirement benefits, almost 50% of TA versus about 17% of QI. And then paid time off benefits was also a big gap. About 81% of TA received, or only 50% of the QI teachers received that benefit. Next, we took a look at items associated with work environment. Some of those items are: the children I teach are well behaved, I'm happy at work, I have a strong relationship with my director, I have time for lesson planning. So overall, TA and QI teachers either agreed or strongly agreed. They were pretty satisfied with all of these aspects of work environment. And interestingly here, QI teachers tended to express greater satisfaction with their work environment compared to TA teachers. The next category is job fit. These items are things like: I want to continue working in early childhood education. I have the education and training to do my job well. I am satisfied with my job fit. Again, TA and QI teachers across the board either agreed or strongly agreed with these statements. And here again, QI teachers expressed a bit more satisfaction than TA on 5 of the 6 items. Moving on to provider results with these same types of items. When it came to pay and benefits, QI providers express lower satisfaction than TA providers on 100% of pay and benefits items. Again, when asking what their desired wage would be, TA providers thought $25.88 was a target wage. QI providers thought $24.42 would be an adequate wage. When it comes to pay and benefits for providers, we again see a gap between TA and QI, with TA providers being more likely to receive all of these types of benefits. The largest gaps for providers were in dental benefits. About 56 of TA received, only about 18 of QI received these benefits. And paid time off, again, was a major difference here, about 40 points or so. In terms of work environment, again, TA and QI providers all pretty satisfied with this aspect. And QI, again, expressing just a little more satisfaction than TA providers on most of these items. When it comes to job fit, again, we got pretty decent scores with agreeing that, this worked for them in their job. And again, this trend continues with the QI providers expressing a bit more satisfaction on most of these items associated with job fit. We also conducted focus groups with current teachers and providers to get their perspectives on wages, retention, recruitment. I'm going to read a couple of these directly. I think it's very informative to hear directly from these stakeholders. One teacher said, "They do a lot, do not get much credit as they should. There needs to be more than an appreciation week. We need more pay." Another teacher said, "Health insurance is important. This is something not offered." Another teacher mentioned that they often spend money out of their own pockets for materials. Just comments about salary continues to come up, and also needing breaks. We continuously saw that PTO, paid time off, was a gap. This was important to teachers. Providers also gave some verbatim feedback. I thought it was interesting. One provider said, "There are some staff who would rather be paid a lower salary and be offered insurance." So, just the power of a complete benefits package It's not all about salary. It's about that pay and benefits together. Another provider said, I cannot find qualified staff to work for less than $15 an hour. Pre-K teachers are offering much more to get kids ready for school. A provider said current wages are not enough money for staff to pay for a home, a car, etc. The wages are on par with what a high school student would make. We also thought it would be interesting to understand the perspectives of former teachers and providers. So we met and interviewed 5 of these stakeholders who had permanently left the preschool education profession. And by and large, they echoed many of the sentiments of the current teachers and providers when it came to recruitment, retention, pay, and benefits. They offered some of the top reasons that they thought teachers and providers left the profession. Number 1 was burnout. And this goes back to not having that paid time off, no scheduled breaks. Staffing, either not enough staff or the quality of the staff was lacking. Excessive paperwork was talked about a lot. They mentioned that staff often take home paperwork that has to be completed off the clock, so they don't get paid for this time. And inadequate pay continued to come up as a reason. So next steps and recommendations. One of the things we thought about understanding the difference in wages between TA lead teachers and QI lead teachers was just for CPP to consider. We're not saying this should happen, but consider expanding teacher promise grants to provide those direct payments to lead quality improvement teachers. We ran a model to see if TPG were granted to all lead teachers across programs, that an additional 8.3% of those QI teachers would earn at least $15 an hour. We've heard a lot about teacher shortages, perhaps a one-time.
No, we only have 20 minutes. We just have 20 minutes left.
Yeah, okay. Most of these recommendations are really about supporting providers, supporting teachers, and getting adequate pay and the benefits. All right. Questions, please. Apologize for the rush, but I'm trying to fit it in.
I have a comment, and I want to thank Innovations for the very important report. It's very well done. And one of the things that I regret, and I kind of asked Shara about the time frame, we don't have enough time. And there's got to be a way for the board to have a deeper dive into this for those of us who would like to do so. So I would like to know if there's a proposal to do so, so that we're not shortchanged in experiencing and knowing what's important, what's next. And, I have like 5 questions. So, I'll come to another meeting, but I think that it's been time well spent, but I thought 2 hours would be enough, but it's not enough.
We're happy to set up that session again. I have to say thank you to Dr. Owens, who had the insight this year to say, instead of trying to fit it into 30 minutes that we normally do at our annual meeting, that we would do a full 2-hour session. I think based on the interaction and discussion, we are so appreciative of feedback and comment for the board. We are more than happy to set up an additional session for board members to do a deep dive. And I'm sure our innovations team, even prior to this meeting, we discussed that and have committed to that. So you will receive an invite for some additional dates that will be exclusive for board members, in addition to the public settings that we have coming up that we'll announce at the end.
Thank you.
And I think taking that into consideration, everyone's question is important, but we have one more segment that I think we really need to get through today. Debbie, thank you for your comment. So we look forward to talking more about this wage study in another session. So this next session is a really important discussion, I think. It's about CPP reach and access. So the ability for CPP to reach preschoolers throughout the city, and the ability for families to access that high quality preschool. So we have some maps, some tables, And we are really presenting some data, some alternatives to answer some of these questions that continue to come up in this space. And we're hoping to get feedback on these as well. The first question is, where do preschool age children in Cincinnati live? This table shows the top 5 most populated neighborhoods in Cincinnati where these preschoolers live. Westwood, East Price Hill, West Price Hill, Avondale, and College Hill. And we show the total of preschoolers that come from those neighborhoods. So this data comes from the home addresses of the kindergarten entry cohort for 2020-2021. So they would have been preschool aged in 1920. We also break down the total looking at the number of children who we know had preschool experience via CPP and CPS versus those who did not have any documented preschool experience via CPP and CPS. I also think it's helpful to look at these data on the map. So this is a map of neighborhoods that CPS serves. The pink areas are the current quality gap neighborhoods. Each of these data points represents a student from that cohort. So the dark blue dots are those who attended CPP or community or CPS preschool. The yellowish dots are those that had no documented preschool. And so I think the takeaway here is to be able to visualize where the preschool age children are clustered. We do see evidence of a lot of clustering in those current quality gap neighborhoods, but we know that this is a current discussion that's always evolving. We can see some of these students also branching out into other neighborhoods that are not currently deemed quality gap. So this is just part of a continuing discussion. The next question is, where are the high quality preschool sites? So we thought we would look at these neighborhoods and look at the number of providers in relation to how many children are in the neighborhoods. And actually my screen is a bit blocked, but you can see the providers listed in the right column that correspond with these neighborhoods. And if we take a look at the map, again, the pink areas are quality gap. We've plotted where the services are essentially. The blue triangles are CPP TA community preschool. The red triangles are CPS preschools. And the green triangles are other high quality preschools who are not CPS and not associated with the CPP network. The next question we pose, how close do preschool age children live to those high quality preschools? So here we have some proximity data. We looked at it a couple different ways. First, we wanted to understand if there are any differences by the socioeconomic status of the neighborhoods that the preschool age children come from. We also wanted to understand, possibly is the reason the kids with no documented preschool, did they have some issues getting to high quality? Were they too far? Was it too difficult to get to? So that's why we made the distinction for those who had attended and not. And really the answer is there's not much of a difference based on any of these variables. If we look at the travel time, which is in the 4th column, within low SES neighborhoods to the closest high quality provider, it only takes about 2 minutes. And for those who didn't attend preschool, their closest preschool is about 2.5 minutes away. There's hardly any difference between those in higher SES areas as well, 2.3 and 2.8 minutes. So all within a 1 minute variability. We do the same thing looking at the chosen preschool. So obviously for the children that didn't go to preschool, we won't have this data. But for those we do, it turns out that they chose to travel a little further to get to their preschool of choice. This wasn't very surprising to us though, because we know that the reasons parents choose preschool, the top 5 reasons didn't have anything to do with proximity to my home. They have to do with safety. Do they value the whole child? Will they prepare my child for readiness? We also heard a lot about, hey, will this site take all of my kids? So if a parent has a preschooler and an infant, and there is a site that only takes preschoolers, well, that's really not an option for that parent. So they may go to the next high quality provider where they can send both of their kids. We've also heard that some parents choose to have the preschool closer to where they work. This slide is just another way of looking at proximity within different distances. And I think the takeaway here is there appear to be many high quality options pretty close to where most of these children live. Next question, and probably the biggest question of the evening: how many preschool age children can Cincinnati Preschool Promise reach? So we chose to approach the question this way. We first started by looking at how many 3 and 4-year-olds live in the city of Cincinnati, and what is the estimated poverty level for their families. So this data comes from the 2019 American Community Survey using the 5-year estimates, which is the most precise data. So there are approximately, based on this survey, 8,075 3 and 4-year-olds in the city of Cincinnati. We chose to focus on those preschoolers who have family income below 300% of federal poverty level. We know CPP is trying to really target those kids who have the greatest needs. So if we look at just that segment of kids in the city, that number is 6,184. So we're going to take that number and apply another estimation to it. But I want to talk about what this estimation is. So there is a report published by RAND. The title is Options for Investing in Access and High Quality Preschool. It's the second of a series of RAND studies on preschool, specifically in Cincinnati. So this is a pretty robust study. They created a 10-year model for expected preschool participation based on age. So they looked at 3-year-old participation, different than 4-year-old participation, as well as income band. They used factors such as program access, eligibility requirements, public funding availability, program structure and quality, as well as local demographics. So here we were able to apply the 5-year estimates as CPP is going into its 5th year. What RAND estimated to be the estimated participation rate for these preschoolers broken down by age and poverty level. And when we did that, we got the number of children expected to participate in the last column. That number comes to 3,943. So we took the 6,184, which are all the 3 and 4-year-olds in the city under 300 FPL, applied these expected rates, came up with the number of 3,943. We think this is a good estimate of what uptake might look like in a non-COVID year. So of course, we are living in a time of COVID. We've talked throughout this presentation about all the impacts of COVID on the system, on enrollment, on providers. So we know that there needs to be an adjustment to that number based on COVID. And what we did, again, this is very high level. We could get down into what month should we start to look at the impact and when should we end. But what we did for purposes of this presentation, we looked at the decrease in enrollment from 2018-19, which was the last full non-COVID year, to enrollment this year. We know we are still feeling the effects of COVID. And across those 2 years, that's about a 20% decrease in enrollment. If you look at it stepwise, the first year from 19 to ending 20 was about 11.7. And that second step from 20 to 21 is a further 9.4. And so what we did was decrease the number from the previous estimation, which would have been a non-COVID target, decrease that number by about 20%, which we come up with a new estimate of 3,150 kids as the target. So finally, if we come to use this target and we look at what the current licensure capacity is within the CPP network, we can think about a couple things. So we have about 3,727 quality and high quality seats. These seats are not just reserved for CPP preschoolers, they're for any preschooler to fill that slot. So if you're looking at a non-COVID year, we almost have enough seats to fulfill that, a little push, we can get to the 39. Looks like we have decent availability and capacity to accommodate that COVID adjusted year 5 expectation. But we know that there are more kids out there. Let's take it back to that level of all the 3 and 4-year-olds at 300 FPL or less. That's 6,184. This network still needs to grow. And if we ultimately look at all the kids in Cincinnati, 3 and 4-year-olds, regardless of their income, again, that number is 8,075. So based on what we presented here, we have a couple recommendations and next steps. And I already alluded to this, but we think the first step should be to engage in those prospective parents, right? Those are the parents who have preschool age children not enrolled. The surveys told us that less than half of those parents had heard of CPP before completing our survey. So there are opportunities there. Opportunities also exist with those high quality providers who are in the footprint, but who are not connected to CPP. We can reach out to them as well. There needs to be some strategic planning around how to go on with the program expansion based on what we found out from the stakeholders this year. This would make sure that we're optimizing ways to reach the targeted children. Also, and CPP continues to do this, and we all do, we need to continue to pursue the most current and the most precise data to make these estimates. Like I said, the most current data at this point is from 2019. We think later this year, we'll be able to get 1-year estimates. But again, that's kind of always a moving target, but we want to continue pursuing current and precise data. Any questions? And I know we're short on time and I apologize. I know I threw a lot at everyone, so.
I think the silence is not because, all the questions were asked or answered. It's because there's just a lot of questions, especially on this part of the report.
Exactly.
So, looking forward to the next session.
Okay, well, I want to certainly thank you, all the presenters and your team for this wonderful data. As Debbie just said, we got a lot to discuss and we'll have to continue this discussion, not only at the board level, but try to integrate some of these questions into each of our committee meetings so that we can reach out to more board members for input. Chara, what do you want to end with?
Just to say that be on the lookout for a doodle poll for us as we schedule the next sessions. This information will be shared with CPS tonight in terms of the year 4 evaluations. You'll see on your screen now the next briefing sessions that we will provide for the public.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We look forward to talking more about this. I know there's a lot of great conversation to be had. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.